I'm just gonna apologize real quick if a virus comes up right here. I can't get rid of it, so I'm just gonna X out of it real quick. So just apologizing ahead of time. That doesn't work. This is how it works. Okay. All right. Pre-policy standards. Prior to policies being set state and nationwide, much of the inclusionary practices revolving around bilingual education was unregulated and poorly represented. Teachers were often not given support or structure to support these children. Kids that were put in English-speaking classrooms were immediately at a deficit. They could not communicate their ideas or their mastery of a subject due to their lack of proficiency in English. Nationwide efforts were hard to build up due to the states having some control over policy. The National Defense Education Act of 1958, in response to the Soviet Union's launch of Sputnik, proving their space exploration ability was on par with or better with the United States, was the first nationwide effort to improve math, science, and most notably, in our category, foreign language education. Note that this is not the same as putting in aid for bilingual students, but this did get the ball rolling, so to speak. The Civil Rights Act, Title VII, in 1964 was what truly opened the gates for change for America and opened the gates for change in America for minority populations. This is the accumulation of decades of protests and movements, which resulted in the foundation being laid for change. Keep in mind that this does not mean improvements are made overnight. Programs, laws, and minds take decades to change when it comes to federal government. Ask anyone in politics. For bilingual education, this is the first step to seriously constructing some sort of structure and framework for students whose primary language is not English. The Bilingual Education Act, Title VII, passed on January 2nd, 1965 by President Lyndon B. Johnson, was America's first firm commitment to providing assistance to students who spoke a home language other than English. It, quote, authorized resources to support educational programs, train teachers and aides, develop and disseminate instructional materials, and encourage parental involvement, unquote. As flowery and wonderful as that program sounds, there is no actual requirement that schools use any language other than English. There was, unsurprisingly, large amounts of debate around the realities of this act. In response to Yarborough's targeting one population, Spanish-speaking Southwest population, Representative Henry B. Gonzalez of Texas challenged it by saying, quote, in view of our continuing efforts to promote mutual respect and tolerance, we will be inviting grave and justly deserved criticism from many ethnic groups if we recognize the problems of only one, unquote. Often when discussing bilingual education, a common trend is to assume that alternate language in question is Spanish. This is absolutely wrong. There is a large spread of languages that are spoken in Texas alone that must be included when discussing aid for bilingual students. America is built on immigration and people come from different cultures, and so it's only reasonable that we have various languages spoken. The first federal court case we'll be discussing is the United States of America versus the state of Texas. In 1970, Judge Justice ordered the Texas Education Agency to assume responsibility of desegregating schools. In 1971, however, scrutiny came under San Felipe and Del Rio school districts on whether or not the districts were providing equal opportunities for Mexican-American students. The schools were eventually consolidated on August 6, 1971, as well as the federal court implementing Civil Action 5281. It banned discrimination on the grounds of race, color, and national origin in Texas public or charter schools. The 1971 case of the United States of America versus the state of Texas does not directly set up plans for bilingual education. However, it does set the background for the 1981 case of the United States versus Texas, which is discussed later. Lau versus Nicholas in 1974 was the largest court hearing in the country at the time that dealt with the issue of bilingual education. It was led by Chinese parents from San Francisco, and the case led to the ruling that, quote, identical education does not constitute equal education under Title VI of the CRA of 1964, the Civil Rights Act, unquote. This was groundbreaking in that it forced school districts to take definitive steps to providing support for bilingual programs. It also established the Office for Civil Rights. The Equal Educational Opportunities Act in 1974 guaranteed equal treatment of all students. They're to be free of bias in an educational environment. This is also one of the most important acts passed, and it's referenced multiple times, and not only the cases we'll discuss in this presentation, but in many different ones onwards to 1974. The Act, great as it is, was again vague in its wording. It states that, quote, failure by an educational agency to take appropriate action to overcome language barriers that impede equal participation by its students in its instructional programs, and it goes on, unquote. It has been interpreted by Congress that, quote, appropriate action, unquote, is meant to stand for bilingual education. It should, however, be clearly stated without the need to interpret the wording. This has been a problem in multiple laws and acts up to this point where it might be assumed it's addressed, but it has not been clearly stated that this issue of bilingual education is in fact being addressed. Excuse me, I'll get a drink. Congress decided that with the 1974 Act, the schools must take action to aid non-English speaking students. Rios versus Reed in 1978 took place in the Federal District Court for the Eastern District of New York, and it found that the school district's transitional bilingual program was not that. It was more of a course in learning English rather than the students receiving instruction in Spanish. Students were being denied an equal educational opportunity, see the Equal Educational Opportunity Act on the previous slide, since they were not receiving instruction in their primary language, which was Spanish, as was the purpose of the program. Quote, a denial of educational opportunities to a child in the first years of schooling is not justified by demonstrating that the educational program employed will teach the child English sooner than a program comprised of a more extensive Spanish instruction. The case argued for the value of employing the child's primary language in their learning, especially in a younger age, rather than forcing learning an alternate language to learn the same material. Castaneda versus Pickard in 1981 was one of the most impactful cases for bilingual students in history. It resulted in a state of standards that were created after a Texas Independent School District's language remediation program violated the EEOA of 1974. As a result, it gave guidelines that had to be met in order to keep programs in check. Some of the outline is number one, theory. The school must pursue a program based on an educational theory recognized as sound or at least a legitimate experimental strategy. It must be in practice. The school must actually implement the program with instructional practices, resources, and personnel necessary to transfer theory to reality. And finally, it must produce results. The school must not persist in a program that fails to produce results. This will be referenced in many different cases and is still used to keep track of students and of programs. The second case that we look at in Texas has a profound impact on the standards for bilingual education. The U.S. District Court found that the state of Texas violated the EEOA of 1974 by not providing sufficient opportunities for minority language speakers to overcome the language barriers they faced. This is in the Tyler District, I believe. As a result, TEA, the Texas Education Agency, and educational agencies around the state were forced to phase in mandatory bilingual education programs in K through 12. Specific requirements were installed to ensure programs were kept to standard, including a language survey for students entering school and 3-year monitoring cycles. This is all meant to ensure students were being kept track of and to make sure that the programs were being beneficial to these students. Gomez versus Illinois. Oh, that's my dog. Sorry. Don't bark. Hey. Sorry. Gomez versus Illinois in 1974 ruled that the state education agencies were required, under EEOA once again, to make sure that the needs of bilingual students were met. This case highlighted the importance of the Castaneda test in order to assure programs are staying within the standards and holding true to them. This also declared that programs needed to be proactive with ensuring students in classrooms. Let me retry that. I'm sorry. This declared that programs need to be proactive with assuring children in classrooms could understand the instruction they were receiving. So if they were in a classroom and they only spoke Spanish, they weren't just getting instruction in English, they were getting instruction in Spanish, a language they could understand. Just like with Lau, though, the court did not require specific program models. Last, we have No Child Left Behind in 2001. It was signed in by President George W. Bush, and it brought in national attention to bilingual student standards and a sweeping change to federal policy where they were concerned. In a short summary, it reauthorized the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965 and it appropriated funds to improve educational standards of limited English proficient students. This assisted students learn English as well as help them meet state standards as well as student academic achievement standards. This was a huge boon as it directed funds towards populations that required a boost in programs.